Hi there everyone and welcome to the Novel Strip Show where I talk about books and comics. So firstly I want to say apologies for not making too many videos. September's been quite a busy month for me, various different reasons. And I did make a couple of videos, but they just were quite long and rambling. So what I've decided to do is, with this video, I know it's going to be quite long and possibly quite rambling. So I'm probably going to end up splitting it to two. And what I'll do with the other videos that I made is go back, revise the content, maybe split them into two, or maybe just redo them again. So yeah, I'll try and keep it to around about the 15-minute mark. If I think it's going to go over, then I'll split it into two. I'm pretty definite that that will happen. So do look out for part two as well. So yeah, today what I'd like to do is just go through the books that I read in September this year. So far I've just done wrap-ups where I look back to last year, to 2017, and see how my opinions of books have changed sort of over the year. But I thought it would be good to do one whilst everything's still fresh in my mind. So for a bit of context, if you haven't seen my previous video, I'll put up a card to it. What I did was a TBR where I listed all the standalone books that I wanted to read in September. So I wanted to get through some standalones to get through my reading list, and also break up the Demon Cycle series, which I'm reading currently, but it's quite a long series, so I thought it'd be a good way to to break it up. And I'd like to say a huge thank you to my friends Kay, Olivia and Vicky, who watched my video and gave me some great tips on where to start, so thank you very much for that, guys. I'd just like to start off by saying as well that in my TBR video, I realised that quite a few of them weren't actually standalones, meaning that I couldn't read them, but I didn't realise that until after I'd made the video. So I'll just read those here quickly in case anyone else wants to focus on standalones. It turns out that Little Women is not a standalone because some of the characters' stories are continued in Little Men. The same with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's not just one standalone book. It's quite a long series, which I didn't realise. So yeah, I didn't read that either. Same with Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. There are more than one book in that series. It's not just one book, it is a series of books. Same with Oryx and Crake. That's part of the Mad Adam series. Shadow of the Wind is also part of the Cemetery of Forgotten Books series. The most recent one was just released in 2018, just in September, just gone there. So it's very new, but yeah, it's a series. And then Labyrinth by Kate Moss is part of the Langdog series. So I didn't read any of those. I also decided that I wasn't going to read anything that was non-fiction. I don't tend to read much non-fiction, so I decided that I'm going to focus on that in September and have in November, and have non-fiction November, and just kind of blast through all the non-fiction that I've got to read then. So I will put up a TBR for that soon. Do look out for it. But in the meantime, yeah, that obviously narrowed down my reading list quite considerably, and I'll just go ahead and start with the books that I actually did read now. And I thought what I'd do is just go in the order that I read them in, rather than, as I normally do, go in the order of books that I enjoyed least to books that I enjoyed most. So these, yeah, just in the order that I happened to read them in. And yeah, I'd love to hear what you think about them if you've read them. So please do let me know. Great, so first up then, I read Tales of Beedle the Bard by J.K. Rowling. I believe it's meant to be pronounced as in rhyming with bowling, but with an R sound at the start. I find that quite hard to say. The word rolling, I have to kind of think about it to say it a lot. So just for ease, I know it's not correct, but pronounce it Rowling. In case anyone wants to correct me, there's a reason why I say it wrong. So this is a collection of 5 Wizarding fairy tales. It's got notes in it that Dumbledore supposedly left, and then it has other notes by J.K. Rowling, which supposedly makes things easier to understand for a Muggle or non-Wizarding audience. So on the whole, I really enjoyed it. Like, the tales were all quite entertaining. I appreciated the notes by Dumbledore as well. I thought that was, just made it a bit more interesting. And the cover of the edition of the book that I got, I think, is really, really nice. I really like it. And yeah, the illustrations inside are nice as well. To be honest, because it's such a short book and the tales inside are even shorter, there's not really much more that I can say. It was, kind of a novel idea of taking fairy tales but setting them for a wizarding audience. I really liked that, and yeah, they were quite enjoyable. And like I said, I feel like the comments by J.K. Rowling and Dumbledore kind of added to that as well. And it was nice to be back in the Harry Potter universe, but not have Harry or the main character's stories change at all. It was just something kind of extra. So yeah, really enjoyed it overall. I would recommend it, and I gave it 4 stars. Next up after that, I read Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson. So for a brief summary, it talks about an adopted child named Jeanette Winterson after the author, even though it's not a biography, really. But she grows up in an evangelist Christian household, and she believes that God has destined her to become a missionary. And then things start to go a bit awry when she finds herself in love with another girl, and sort of all the conflict begins there. In terms of what I thought, I really enjoyed it initially, and I remember being quite into it. I read it relatively quickly. It's fairly short, about 300 pages, I think. However, since then, I mean, it was only, it was less than a month ago that I read it, and I find I can't really remember much of the book at all, to be honest. There's not any specific scenes that stand out as being particularly vivid. And to be honest, I think I'd have to say, looking at it now, I think it's probably the author's best known novel because of the subject matter rather than the skillful way that it's written. I definitely enjoyed it, and while I was reading it, I found myself able to picture everything quite clearly, and I was quite involved. I could get into the character's head to a certain extent, but I guess there wasn't really anything that engaged me too much emotionally, which it could have been quite an emotional novel. It could have been perhaps even darker than it was. I just feel like the reason I don't remember much is because I didn't fully engage with it, even though I do remember engaging with it at the time. There was nothing that perhaps affected me too emotionally. One thing that I didn't realise was that even though the protagonist was referred to as Jeanette, it kind of didn't click that she had the exact same name as the author. So I guess that adds an interesting spin to it. The author was actually adopted in a town in Lancashire, and her parents, or her mother at least, were part of the evangelical church. So it's kind of interesting that it's not supposedly a direct biography, but she chose to give the main character her name. I think that does add another level to it. She is also a lesbian as well. So there is, obviously, you can see she's drawn a certain amount from her own experience. But I think perhaps because I just remember so little of it, I think that may be symptomatic of it being her first novel, maybe. And yeah, I think because I remember enjoying it, I definitely would like to read more by her. But I just don't really remember much of it, which is bad considering it was just a month ago that I read it. It can't really have left that much of an impression. When I did read it though, when I finished it, I gave it 4 stars. I think I would have to drop that to maybe 3.5 now though, because I just don't remember too much of it. So yeah, can't have had that much of an effect really. Moving on then, the next book that I read was First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North. So for a brief summary of this, it tells the story of Harry August, who's a Kalachakra, which means that when he dies, he's born again in exactly the same time, exactly the same place, but he has memory of his previous life. And it turns out Harry's quite unique, even amongst Kalachakra, because he's what's known as a mnemonic, which means he remembers every single detail of every single life incredibly vividly. He doesn't ever forget anything. With most Kalachakra, yes, they remember their previous life, but as they go through several lives, they forget little details, just as anyone else would if they lived for hundreds and hundreds of years, whereas Harry remembers everything. So, yeah, first of all, when I started the book, something really annoyed me, was that there's a massive picture of the author in the inside cover, because, apparently a small headshot just wasn't significant. It had to take up the whole cover. that bugs me because as well as just feeling it's unnecessary, maybe it's a British thing, expecting kind of modesty. Um, I don't like to feel the author's involvement when I'm reading a book. To me, I want to read it and enjoy the work without knowing much about the author. Afterwards, I might then want to go and find out about them and find out about their life. But whilst I'm reading it, it would really ruin my enjoyment of the book if I can feel their presence there. So a big, massive fuck off picture on the inside cover, you're gonna feel their presence there. Um, However, I feel that's more of a personal thing, to be honest. It doesn't really say much about the work itself. Another personal thing that really annoyed me is underneath the picture, it says quite clearly Claire North is the pen name of Catherine Webb. So, if you're going to tell me your actual name on the inside cover, why have a pen name on the outside cover? Yeah, that really, really quite bugged me a lot. And so, yeah, I feel like kind of set the tone for the rest of the book, really. I wasn't expecting great things after those two things annoyed me. And yeah, I think I was right, to be honest. I did try to put them out of my mind. Um, but yeah, what I felt was, in terms of the plot, it was fairly interesting. But I did feel a lot of parts of it were how I felt with some episodes of Sherlock. I feel like the author was just trying to show off how clever she is rather than paying attention to making it interesting. And certainly in terms of the characters, I feel like that was the main letdown for me. Um, so throughout it, he perhaps because he remembers everything, perhaps because he's lived so many lives, and he's kind of become I don't know, like used to everything. He's not shocked by anything. He just seemed incredibly dull and detached, and therefore he didn't have a unique voice. He was just kind of a generic template of heterosexual white man as the protagonist. Therefore, he doesn't show any emotion, doesn't demonstrate any personality, even when he's the narrator and it's narrated in first person. I do think a fair few books do suffer from this, especially sci-fi and fantasy. At least of the ones that I've read, it kind of seems that there's just a man as the protagonist, and therefore he doesn't show any emotions. He doesn't have a unique voice. He's just a male, and it kind of doesn't go any further from that. Obviously, women do have their own problems as well in sci-fi and fantasy. I don't want to seem like I'm forgetting that. But he's obviously the main voice, the main character in first 15 Lives of Harry August, and I just didn't really care about him at all. I think, having that attitude of not developing a unique voice and not having him show emotion, it makes it seem quite lazy in one respect, untrue. Men do have emotions, we do feel, and I want a book to explore that. Firstly, in a book, I have to care about the characters and believe them, and they have to be unique, for me to want to care about what happens to them. And I feel like that was completely secondary. It was just, oh, look how clever I am because I'm talking about, subatomic particles and how space-time works, and the impacts that it can have. And the interesting ideas, are these characters born into a different reality every time that appears the same, or how does it work? Yes, there are interesting ideas there, but if the characters that they affect aren't interesting, I don't really care. And yeah, so that was definitely the case with this book, which was quite a disappointment. And yeah, I'd give it 2.5 stars overall. I think what I'll do, because we're coming up to the 15-minute mark there, is I'm going to stop the video here, and I'll go on and do a part 2. So please make sure you watch that.